Hi, welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And definitely very, very excited to have back Diana Larsen on the show. Got some great topics lined up, including mini retros, just-in-time learning, new ways of working, the second edition of the retrospective book she worked on, and also, if there's time, we'll talk about the Lead Without Blame book. But before we jump to any of those great topics, is there anything, go ahead and introduce yourself, Diana. That'd be great.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm Diana Larsen. You can find me at dianalarsen.com and sign up for my newsletter there if you want to. I've been in the agile space and the software space for over 25 years, and in the team development space for another 10 or 12 years before that. So a lot of history in this world, written a few books, and I'm excited to be here. I'm a lover of mobbing. Yes, I am a lover of mobbing. So
Fantastic,
yeah.
fantastic. Good, 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 good. Well, let's jump right into it. You had
Yeah.
micro retros on here as a topic. What have you been thinking about on that?
Well, actually, I wanted to share that I was really inspired by what I've learned about mobbing and what my son Willem, who's also, very much into this world, has shared with me. And when I've had the opportunities to participate as part of a mob, which I always love the opportunity to do, that the retrospectives needed to make a change. And just in conversation with folks, I learned about something that was happening in the teams that Willem was on, that he was calling micro retros. And that got me thinking about the need for, because so many times when people tell me about what's wrong with their retrospectives, they'll say, oh, our manager won't give us time. They say they take up too much time. We can't get it scheduled. We can't get everybody to show up. Right. And all along I'm thinking, yes, but retrospectives were always just intended to be part of the flow of the work. Right. It's just part of how you work, is that you reflect on what you're doing. So putting all of these things together, actually, I started doing some keynote addresses and talks in different places called Learn Small, Learn Frequently, and Continuously Improve. And, the idea of every team can find their own cadence, their own frequency cadence. If you're working in Pomodoros, then it's maybe the end of every Pomodoro. If you're not working in Pomodoros, maybe it's morning break time, lunch, afternoon break, whatever kind of work cadence is suitable for the team. Those are all opportunities to have very small, short retrospectives. And by that, I mean still going through the 5 steps, right? The set the stage, gather data, generate it. But that is possible. Way back when Esther and I were writing the first edition of the Retrospectives book, we would get together and work and pair together in the same site for a few days. And one or the other of us would, or both sometimes, would then have to go to the airport. And we would use that 15-minute ride to the airport or whatever to do a retrospective on the work that we had just done, as well as we'd reflect at the end of every day as we worked. And so all of this has, made me think more about that, about how can you make that happen and how important that is, because of the effect of compound interest.
Yeah.
Is how I like to think about it, right? If you're doing tiny improvements, and it's like, it's taking Woody's phrase of turn up the good and looking for even more frequent opportunities to turn up the good. How can we keep getting better and better and better, just in small ways? And in doing that, teams build their confidence and their skill at having that kind of reflection and learning, and then just making choices about where is the best way to improve. this time right now where we can immediately take action. And so anyway, I'm very excited about that, and I'm giving talks about it all around, and so on. And I'm really looking, I know you've already had people on here talking about fast, but I'm thinking there's a huge opportunity for, in the fast cycles, for the teams that form out of the collective to find very frequent ways to do retrospectives. And so that's part of what I'm working on as part of my role in that community as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I had one follow-up question
Mm-hmm.
that I love everything you said, and I think I've almost been spoiled with mini retros. I feel like
Yeah.
that I've come to love them so much that for lack of a better term, traditional retro, I don't know what the term
Yeah.
is, where you
Right.
like you
Right.
meet for an hour,
Yeah.
like
Well, yeah.
scheduled
Yeah.
at one part of the week or something like that.
Right.
The compare and contrast that has been interesting. But one thing that popped out from what you said that I am curious on is all 5 steps of a retrospective in a mini retro.
Right.
Can you give an example of that? Because that's maybe one thing I've
Sure.
struggled with, because I feel
Sure.
like maybe I start step 1 and 2, and then it's been, the
Right.
time of mini retro has ended or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, basically it is, okay, the Pomodoro timer goes off.
Yes.
Somebody who's taken the role of ensuring that the retrospectives happen, says, oh, it's time for our retrospective before we take our break. That sets the stage.
Ah,
Right.
yes.
What just happened during our work time that you would like to talk about? Everybody gets a chance to chime in. We gather some data. What is that? Which one of those things do we think we'd get the most benefit out of making an adjustment to, right?
Yeah.
Generate insights. Okay, all right. We want to do that one. How are we going to start? Okay, let's figure out how we're starting. Okay, break time. Let's go.
Yeah. All right. Well, so
I mean,
yeah,
it could be that fast, really.
thinking
And
about it,
yeah,
actually, I was recently in this situation. I was mobbing with a team. One of the team members basically, so I came in and I was just helping, right?
right.
And so I was like, oh, I'll mob with you for a couple of hours and we'll come out of that. And so I ended up spending, kind of the last half of the day with him. And then at the very end, one of the mobbers essentially said, hey, we're about to do our retrospective. Would you like to join us? And kind of again setting the stage and then kind of going through those steps. But it's kind of very unconscious
Yeah.
at that point.
Right.
But yeah, it's kind of funny because I hear we actually have had people recently just asked to observe our retrospectives because we get a lot of people
Right.
that tell us they've never had a good retrospective and things like that, or
Right.
retrospectives have always been painful,
Yeah.
and so I know somebody who was recently going to start joining a team or start managing a team, and was asking to observe the retrospectives, and kind of the insights that came out were things like they weren't following those steps. I referred your book to them,
Thank you.
and other things along those lines. So both of those were kind of interesting things that triggered for me
Yeah.
as you were talking.
Yeah. What I always tell people is, I mean, people think, oh, they look at 5 steps of a retrospective. Oh my God, this must, and all the activities that we created, basically because we knew at that time when we first published the book, people didn't have facilitation skills on a team. That wasn't something that was expected at all, and so we were really trying to give people guidance about what does this look like if you're setting the stage to get a group of people to talk together. What does this look like? Because in essence, that 5 steps is basically how humans do things. We notice that there's an issue, or we notice something's out of place, or and it grabs our attention, and that sets the stage to think further about it. And then automatically we just, well, what's wrong with it? Is the leg falling off of the chair? Or is has somebody not talked to me for a very long time? Is my technology not working for me? We notice it very quickly. We kind of think about very quickly, well, what are my options here? What could I possibly do? We pick something and we do it. And that happens in like a split second in our brains. The difference is that when you're on a team, you're trying to get all the brains to work together.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we call those steps out specifically, because we're trying to get all the brains to go through those very human problem solving and decision making steps together, so that they can have buy-in from everybody in the team and move forward together. But yeah, it was never intended to be a really heavyweight thing. And I think when people have done retrospectives often enough, it does start clicking with, oh, well, that's just the natural way I think. Right. So, your experience, Chris, sometimes people ask me, well, we just did such and such. Should we have a retrospective? And I think, well, gosh, I already did kind of in my own brain, but yes, let's do it together. Right.
Yeah.
I think there's still a place for what I'm now calling the overview or umbrella retrospectives.
Yes.
There's still a place, and whatever cadence you pick for that, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or whatever, too much longer than that, it's hard to keep everything in mind. But to be able to say, okay, well, we had all these mini retros, we had all these micro retros. Was there a theme there? Is there something that came out of that says, here's the thing that we need to look more deeply at? And then you use that retrospective to do those deeper dives. But doing those small continuous improvements just really gets people ready to do that, builds their improvement muscle, their learning and improvement muscle, I think, as a team.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Right on. Yeah. And it reminds me of when you have healthy mobbing or healthy mini retros going on, how like you said, it just is fairly automatic. Like I remember back kind of the umbrella retrospectives being the only retrospective for a while.
Yeah, right.
And it was a very high willpower thing to take the action and make it happen.
Yeah.
Where I've noticed with mobbing, it's almost like I'm trying to think of the name for it. It's like covert mini retros that happen where an event occurs and let's say it's either joy or pain or something, right?
Yeah.
And then we're talking about it, kind of going through those 5 stages naturally, and the driver just does it and fixes the problem, takes the action, right? And so sometimes when we come to those umbrella retrospectives, I guess there's a pessimist and a optimist interpretation, but sometimes there's like no actions because everything we thought of to improve has already been done.
Right.
At least that's like the optimist interpretation. The pessimist one is that there's some elephant lurking or something like that that won't be talked about. But in my experience, it's just because everything everybody's seen that wanted to try something has already been tried by the time you get to the umbrella one.
And I think the question there really is there a theme to all those things? Is there some reason we should look deeper at those things?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
we don't need to fix any of that stuff. It's all done.
Yeah. And I agree that there is value in the kind of umbrella, as you call it, retrospective, because looking at the, when you're in the weeds, your observations and insights are different than when you're taking a step back and looking at a bigger picture, for sure.
Yeah.
A few things that I think I like a lot. So looking at a value stream map or a I can't remember the name of it right now. The systems thinking graph.
Right.
When you bring those in and talk about it that way, or drawing out like a higher level process, it I think generates system like higher level system style retros. And causal loop diagramming is what I was trying to bring up. And then I think also, it might be a frequency of interaction thing. You're with people all day, and mini and micro retros can be really helpful. But if you are, if it's teams of, or groups of teams working in a direction together, then you might have some opportunities in that, more traditional style. So yeah, but I think Austin likes keeping retros very small too. So there is something to be said for managing and working out the numbers of it.
Nice.
Yeah,
Cool.
for sure. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think maybe there's Pomodoro micro retros, and then there's infrequent, MIDI retros. And then at the end, if you finish a product or finish a version, then you do the macro retro.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Fantastic. Yeah. And sometimes it's quite obvious that one like that is needed, right? Like we just hosted yesterday a middle school mobbing event where, different engineers hosted, mini mobs with middle school students. And it was just immediately obvious, like we need a retro after this with all the facilitators, because there's just so much that happened in a short window that, to unpack. And so sometimes the umbrella retro is just, you can just feel the obvious need for it.
Yeah, because in a situation like that, you do have a team of people that you want to be cohesive, but they're all having different experiences.
Yes.
I mean, to some degree, that's true anytime, but that we all have our own experience. But in that instance, it's even more worthwhile to make sure that you share the impressions and the experiences and the things to be able to prepare well for the next one.
Nice.
For sure. Yeah.
Cool. Might be a good time to jump into just-in-time learning. What are you thinking here, Diana?
Well, actually, Justin, I mean, that's a little bit of what I mean by micro retros, is that we are learning, our learning is our work. You've probably heard me say this before, but I think we've moved away from knowledge work to learning work. Our work is more about learning and building on the skills that we have to be able to learn, and the previous knowledge that we've gained, but it's in the service of learning what's new, learning what we need to know, learning how things are behaving, all of those things, because they're changing all the time now. And micro retros, I think, is one way of doing more of that just-in-time learning, not putting off the learning until we're in a workshop, or putting off the learning until, we're having a big retrospective, or, something like that. It's, how do we build learning in to our regular workday and honor it, and not say, oh, that's different from the work. No, by and large, these days, it is the work. What are we learning? And sometimes, I mean, like right now, I'm resisting learning how to do things like produce podcasts. I'm really, I know that's learning that is in front of me, and I just haven't quite taken the step to move into it. But that's where my field is going. I need to be able to learn to use these tools beyond Zoom, which I've learned to use for meetings and stuff. But it's kind of the just-in-time learning is a topic that includes the micro retros, and is really a lot bigger, I think. And that's kind of the topic of Lead Without Blame, building resilient learning teams. It's how are we creating environments for teams to do the learning that they need to do continuously, and to respect and encourage each other in our learning. And noticing, one of a term that we use as a motivator in Lead Without Blame is co-intelligence. How do we build the co-intelligence of our team, which also includes where are the learning gaps in our team? What do we need as a team need to learn that we haven't learned yet? Or what do we need to be alert to? What learnings do we need to be alert to that we haven't been able to acquire yet? And so, it's just learning. So it's learning all the way down.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, it reminds me of when mobbing, someone expresses something they don't know or curiosity about something.
Yeah.
And what I often like to do is, like you said, don't separate it like, oh, that's something separate from the work we're doing. It's just like, oh, let's do that. Let's learn that right now. Like Google it or ask AI or
Right.
let's try that experiment right now. And and to be honest, it's very relevant to whatever we're working on in the moment. And then that learning is tied directly to the thing you're doing as opposed to something separate and independent,
Right.
And I think when you're able to do that, it kind of has that fast self-reinforcing feedback loop that makes learning exciting, right? It's like I'm curious about something and then I learned it and then now I'm applying it and it's all happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it helps encourage it to keep happening. And there still is a time and place for like scheduled learning or dedicated learning time or a training session or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I've definitely seen a lot of value in the just in time and sponsoring that.
Right. And yeah, and which is a different, the classroom learning kind of thing is a different kind of learning. But what I've noticed about myself, and I don't know about you, but it sounds like you may have a similar tendency, is that I learn something best when I can apply it immediately. If I try to learn something way in advance that I'm planning to apply 2 weeks from now, the learning does not stick as well as when I have the opportunity to use it right now. And then, then I have, then it's mine. Then I can use it again and again and again. But like I have a lot of books in my library, a lot of books in my library. And what I generally do, I know that they're interesting to me and I know that there's going to be valuable information in there that I will want to learn about at some point. But when it comes into my office, I scan the table of contents, I scan the index, I look, maybe at the introduction and conclusion of all the, so I have a sense of what's in there. And then I put it on the shelf until the thing happens where that's the book I need to be going to right now. Now I need to learn how to do that facilitation technique or learn how to think about that way of thinking about systems issues or whatever that might be. It's mine when I apply it. And until then, it's just, I hate to say this, but it's just knowledge. It's not really as accessible to me. It's still reference in the book, right? And I don't know if everybody is that way about if other people can learn to do things way in advance before they're going to apply them. But I feel like that's one of the, I've facilitated a lot of workshops and but if I don't, along the way, I figured out if I don't get people applying the concepts to something that's meaningful to them right in that workshop, then I feel like I'm kind of wasting people's time because they're not, if they don't apply it right away, they're just going to take it back and say, oh, well, that was interesting. I ought to be able to do that, but I didn't really get a chance to practice it. So maybe it won't be top of mind when it's relevant, So I don't know if that matches your experience or not, but that's kind of how it works for me.
I mean, I do think that people probably learn in different ways. And often there is like some value to like, oh, I saw that months and months ago and now it applies here. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly the idea of cataloging, like you were saying, all the things that you the information you do have access to, and
Right.
and kind of there's comfort in knowing like I can figure that out when I need it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the internet for me, I think, is a lot of that, where it's like, okay, that is something I expect I could look up, or that is something I expect I could not look up, and those are two very different scenarios. And so I've certainly been in the cases where it's like, oh, this thing is totally novel. People have never done this before, and so we will be trailblazing, right? And I think trailblazing learning versus, it's in the work, I think of it as like the known unknowns, right? But there is different categories of known unknowns. And so I've kind of graphed this out for the team, even is like there is the known unknown where somebody's done it before, you just haven't done it before.
Yeah.
There's the known unknown of no one's ever done it before. And then for software development, I like also the known unknown of a third-party API, where it's like, that they will eventually change something and break whatever you're doing, but you don't know when or how.
Yeah.
And so, when talking about known unknowns now in the work, some things it's like, okay, I can prepare for, right? The sum of my knowledge will help me make a discovery in a totally novel space, right? But if it's something like a design pattern for a particular situation, often I need to know the situation, the name of the pattern, and how to look it up. And those are two very different contextual things. And so I like to break them into those categories.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Nice.
Well, and then of course there are the unknown unknowns.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is sort of the open space principle about be prepared to be surprised.
Yes.
You just
Well, and
don't know.
improvisation, I think, is like really it is a skill. And some people freeze when something happens, or have a very hard time getting through that. And so I do like the idea of learning to be a better improviser, which is like a completely different thing as well.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it depends what you're learning too, right? That was really cool what you shared, Diana, about where you skimmed books and kind of become aware of what's in there, so that when the situation arises, you can use it. And I was taught the speed reading thing in college, and it's been useful, but I never noticed that side effect, because once you're aware of what's in there, then you know how to reference it. And I think when it comes to learning just knowledge, it depends a lot on what kind of knowledge it is, right? So if it's for whatever industry or thing you're in, if it's the equivalent to how to change the headlamp of a very specific kind of car, it's like very practical, very step by step, and very specific to one very specific context. Like I've done in a couple different cars now, and it's like they're very weird and different, right?
Totally different.
Yeah. Versus knowledge that almost applies to everything, like general principles and things like that. That to get a little geeky, it's kind of following Socrates. It's like when you learn about those things, it kind of changes who you are, and it reorders your life as you're learning. And I feel like since that applies to everything, there is more value in just learning that in general, where the changing the headline thing, maybe for coding, there's specific things like that, where that would only be applicable in a very specific situation, right? And so, yeah, and I agree with that. Without application feels very transient. But other things, maybe the application is always accessible, so you can apply it, right after you learn it, when you go downstairs with your family or go work with your team, right? So,
Yeah. Well, and I would encourage people to do that, for those kinds of things. I mean, there's a lot of cross applicability from, how I get along with my teammates at work to how I get along with people in my family, or, how I get, human dynamics are human dynamics wherever you find them. But yeah, the thing to Chris's point, the known unknowns, how to change the headlamp on my car. I know I'm going to be able to look that up on YouTube or someplace, right? That is, so in that sense, the learning is in the learning how to access those kinds of information as well, where do I go for that? What's going to be the richest source? Who do I trust to tell me to do it the right way? All of those kinds of things. That's all learning too. How do I approach this thing?
Well, and I find that concept also really interesting because I do run into a lot of people that are in some way helpless in that regard, where
Right.
it's like they're like, oh, I don't know how to do this, and then they're like, and then that's like the end of the story. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
well, it's like very easy to get to that information here, and so I
Right.
do find myself explaining that, and often there's like a block there,
Right.
and so kind of bringing people out of that mentality, I think is a whole other
Right.
story of it's like information is actually readily accessible and easy to get to, and a lot, a lot of what people need will
Yeah.
kind of be a combination of the willingness to learn and where to find it.
Right.
And so I've had that conversation a few times recently where it's just like this almost like a self-perception of helplessness that it's like, oh, I can't do anything about that myself,
Yeah.
so I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's an aspect of the sort of growth mindset, fixed
Yeah.
mindset thing, growth mindset. I'll be able to figure it out somehow, I don't know it now, but given the right pointers or whatever, I'll be able to do that. And versus the fixed mindset, which is I need a lot more process. I need a lot more help. I need direction. I
Yeah.
don't know how to do this for myself. And yeah, so those are, learning skills, I think, are important skills to learn, right? That's a part of the package of what we need to learn, particularly in the kind of work that I've been calling learning work, the creative functions. Software development is one of my favorite. I've heard Ward Cunningham say a lot of interesting things, but one of my favorite things that I ever heard him say was that if I tell myself that I don't, that I'm done, then I'm telling myself I'll never be able to create something new. And they call us software engineers, but they should really call us software journalists. We're more writers than we need more creative writing tools than we need calculus, for instance, depending on what we're trying to do. And use but that's all paraphrased. None of that is exactly what Ward said, but it's the intent of, where he pointed me when I first, came into the field, that is really important. I think, you got to be able to do that.
Nice.
Well, maybe it's a good time to jump to new ways of working and the future of work.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hearing a lot these days about fragile and agile being dead. And, the thing is, I've been hearing that since like 2010.
Yeah.
It started really early, I think, in the agile movement. It's like, oh, well, we've done it. And to some extent, I think that's, just a feature or an effect of kind of going through the chasm, right? The pioneers, they figure it out and they're ready to move on to something else. And so this part is done for them. They don't need that part anymore. I'm going to build on it and do something else, right? Use it in some other way. And then the early adopters kind of go through that same thing. And now some of the early majorities are going through some of that same thing. And I think maybe that's why we hear waves of it. But what excites me is that there are a lot of people out there looking for more creative ways for people to come together to do creative kinds of work. And particularly the kind of work that needs high collaboration. And so it's not just the people in the Agile movement, or even more specifically XP or Scrum or whatever the methodologies, but it's also things like beyond budgeting and the Uta Eckstein and John Buck's book Bossa Nova, where they said, well, look, there's beyond budgeting, there's open space, there's systems thinking, there's agile, there's all these things, sociocracy, that are all talking about how do we work together in better ways, more collaboratively, how do we find better practices for that, and so that we can all thrive, including the organizations that create that opportunity for all of us to make a living, right? And so it heartens me to see that, there's lots of future of work groups all around the world, and within the Agile space, it's kind of spawned the Reimagine Agile people and the Heart of Agile that Alistair Coburn is promoting, and FAST, which we mentioned earlier, looking at how do we put these things together in even better ways, building on what we have already learned. How can we learn to do it even better? And that gives me hope. That makes me optimistic that there's a lot of people out there. While there are a lot of people out there working on ways of shutting us down, there are also a lot of people out there working on those other ways of helping us be together in better ways. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I think it's always interesting to see the new movements that either take on the branding of Agile, or almost take on the antithesis of the branding of Agile, like kind of this negative or positive stance with it.
Right.
And for me, I always have to do a check that is this the same principles and values of Agile, or is this something antithetical to it? Is it just the same principles but rebranded differently, or stated differently, and so I don't know if I'm oversimplifying it, but I often just like to look past all the brochures and the marketing and just be like, okay, what are you saying? What are your claims here? Is this really something different, or is it the same thing? And so yeah, I don't know. What's your response to a new framework, a new movement, a new thing? Like, what's your first go-to moves?
Well, I have a large network of people that I have trusted their thinking in the past, and I have been impressed with what they've had to say. And so if it's new to me, but it feels like it's been around a little while and I'm just now figuring out that it's around, I mean, this is kind of what I did with, say, Wardley mapping, for instance. I was like, oh, who's talking about this? Who's doing this? I don't know. Some of these are people I really trust. Is this, is this something I need to go learn? Or do I just need to know who has learned it so that I can tap into it when I need an application, which is what I eventually did. Because you can't learn it all, right?
Yeah.
You have to be, you need to count on the co-intelligence of your network too. And so, when I see something where people who I know are good thinkers, then I will look more deeply. That's usually my entry point to a thing. On the other hand, because I have attended a lot of conferences over the years and I've gotten to meet a lot of people, which is a privilege that I know not everybody has, I've also had the opportunity to see the genesis of a few things, like mobbing and like FAST, and like there's some other ones out there where I've been present sort of when the spark, or nearby when the spark occurred, right? And then I've been able to watch it grow. And if it seems like it's growing in a good direction, then I pay more and more attention to it. So that always just really excites me. Or I see some a young person who comes to an event and gives out a really new take on some idea and everybody gets excited, it's like, I'm going to keep my eye on that person. I bet they're going to go somewhere. And in fact, that has happened. And, I've been a good predictor about that over the years. And I just kind of keep it to myself. I don't tell anybody. It's like, I want to watch him better or her and see what more they're going to have to say.
Awesome.
One of those was Trisha, who I ended up writing a book with. So that was kind of nice. But yeah, that's how I do it. And there are lots of ways then to dig deeper, look for videos about the thing, or whatever, learn more about it. But yeah.
Very good. Nice.
I'll say your comment on wordly mapping made me think of when I was exploring it. So one opinion I'll throw out there is wordly mapping is a great data gathering step for a retrospective within an IT team, like a servers,
nice.
And like it certainly the discussion of commodity versus novelty is a really interesting one to have. So I find myself recommending wordly mapping in that context, especially in a setup for a retro in that area. So might be an interesting thing, but
no, that is an interesting. I hadn't, I've thought about it in terms of sort of planning and strategy work, obviously, for my own companies, like Agile Fluency Project, we did a wordly map. Someone helped us do a wordly map for that. And, identifying all those different parts and what the progression is in the marketplace and so on. But for an IT project, I can see how that would be even, maybe even more on point.
Yeah, because very, very large IT organizations, or even just any IT organization, has to deal with commodity a lot more.
Right.
But I often see IT organizations, writing something themselves that is a commodity. And so even in any discussion with our own IT groups, the first thing that's going through my head is this a commodity or not, and how high up in the value chain is it? So I do a mini wordly map in my head before I have a conversation with anyone. So it is I think a fantastic tool in that environment. If anybody,
learning tool.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. It exposes a lot of data about the system in that context.
Nice. Well, we are coming up on time a little bit, and it'd be hard to end the show without you talking a little bit about, at least on the second edition of the retrospective book and the Lead Without Blame book. So do you mind jumping into that? I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, so the second edition of the Agile Retrospective book just came out. It's got a new subtitle, Practical Guide for Catalyzing Team Learning and Improvement. We thought we would just kind of do an update on the 2006 first edition. And then once we got into it, we realized, yes, the world has changed, and it's changed even more than we had thought about. And so it just in terms of pages, it's more than twice as long as the first edition. But we're addressing a lot of things that people have told us that they have trouble with in retrospectives. Like there's a whole chapter of how do you actually make those steps toward improvement happen after the retro. It's almost like that's the sixth step of the retro, close the retro and then go do it, right? So there's a whole chapter on that. There's a whole chapter on remote retrospectives, which is, we weren't doing much at all. Because we didn't have the tools. We didn't have the communication tools or those technologies in 2006.
It's funny. I'm running into
all phone and polycoms. It's like
I'm running into many people that they're doing an in-person retro, and they're asking to be using digital tools for the in-person
Yeah.
retro now.
Yeah.
And so it's a really interesting
Yeah.
divergence, I think, from the like common
Yeah.
wisdom of pre-COVID.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, COVID changed a lot.
Yeah.
And so anyway, all of those we've updated, we looked at every word in the book and decided if it should stay or not, every sentence. And so some of the familiar things like, how to be a good facilitator, how to manage group dynamics, how to design your own retrospectives, those chapters are still in there. But they've been updated. They've been refreshed and updated with current knowledge and current tools. And then we've added quite a bit more. So I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's going to be, I hope it is as popular as the first one was. And it's out. It came out for sure. Out now. It's available. I even looked it up to see, because I'm going to be in Europe this next for June this year. I don't know when this podcast is going to come out. So for June, I'm going to be in Europe speaking at a couple of conferences, and I went on Amazon.de to see is the book there as well as on Amazon here, and it is. So it's available, I think, everywhere at this point. Yeah.
Excellent.
And yeah, so that's exciting. I'm still the thing that writing Lead Without Blame, the personal epiphany that I got from Lead Without Blame was as I looked back over my career, my whole career has really been about leadership, learning environments, and teams. It's like there's some Venn diagram in the middle there is where I'm always attracted, and which is why mobbing attracted me way back in the beginning, and I kept watching it, and because it fit in there. And so the Lead Without Blame book is really about how do we encourage that intersection to give the most value for everyone, and in terms of learning, being teams of people being able to respond to whatever life and the marketplace throws at them, that kind of resilience. So yeah. So I'm doing talks these days. I'm doing some talks in different places, different conferences. I'll be at the XP conference in Bolzano, Italy. And then I'm going to be at the Agile World Conference in Munich, the first part of July. Tricia and I do a LinkedIn Live every month that on some topic related to the Lead Without Blame book. Those are always fun. I'm involved with Ray Arell and the Agile Coaching Network every month as a panelist, and just popping up all over the place, looking for opportunities to help people, particularly people in leadership roles, formal or informal leadership roles, find better ways to create those learning environments and work with their teams and work as a team. So that's kind of what I'm up to these days. And like I said in the beginning, at dianalarsen.com, you can sign up for my newsletter, and it'll tell you every month all the places I'm going to be and all that kind of stuff.
All right. Well, that might be a good point for us to close out the episode. So to our audience, if maybe your retrospectives have turned into postmortems accidentally in the past, or maybe somebody who facilitates them and maybe could use this episode, please share this episode with them, or maybe even just-in-time learning, that sort of thing. And if you agree or disagree with anything, please chat with us in the comments. The activity on the comments is really important, and so we can get kind of community interacting with each other. Diana, thank you very much for joining us, and to the audience, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you next time. Bye everybody.